Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Elena. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing
Good to
very
see
well,
you.
thank you.
All right. I'd like to start with this important question. You've had an extensive and impressive career in federal compliance and law. Can you share with us the journey that led you to specialize in language access, disability access, and compliance?
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate that. And the journey, just like a lot of journeys, involves a lot of things. So, just for example, going back almost 100 years when my grandparents came to the United States, they didn't speak any English, and they came from Russia. So they experienced all kinds of discrimination, and they were shut out of certain things. And my dad told me stories about various incidents. So I think that stuck with me certainly after I got out of law school. And then also working for the Justice Department, I really got an exposure to things that I wouldn't have ordinarily been exposed to, like language discrimination against Native Americans in the Southwest. That's not really something I was aware of. And all of that kind of formed into where things are now. I mean, I can tell you a story about with disability access if you'd like to. I hadn't done any work on with the Americans with Disabilities Act before this. I didn't learn it in law school. But back in, I think it was 2002, DOJ started the first program about polling place access for people with disabilities. And I had a lot of enforcement work I was doing in the Southwest on behalf of the Navajo Nation and the Hopi Nation, as well as San Carlos Apaches and some other Native American nations in that part of the country. Well, when we rolled out this program, it became very obvious in working with the counties that on which the reservation sits that polling places were very remote, sometimes in gravel, dirt roads, parking lots that were not surface, that were dirt. There were entrances to buildings where the doors were too narrow, and there were steps that had to be taken. So, in talking to the counties basically said, we don't have a lot of options in these rural areas for polling places. So, what do you suggest we do? And that kind of got me started into this issue of with access and how you can have just dirt and pebbles can be an impediment to people with mobility disabilities. And a little step, just like an inch high, can also it's like a canyon for people who are navigating with a wheelchair, for example, or a mobility device. So I guess in short, that's really where things started for me, and then also and work to form the career that I have now.
Very interesting. As a former senior trial attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice, what were some of the most impactful cases or projects you worked on regarding disability rights?
And I would talk about the disability access on Indian reservations. And I went to these polling places with the county election officials, and we saw narrow doorways. We had a wheelchair which wouldn't fit into a door. Uh, dirt,
Right.
dirt surface parking lots. It really,
Mm-hmm.
you go to one of those parking lots after a heavy rain, you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine what they're like for anybody, but for people with mobility disabilities or a visual disability, it can become something that is completely unpassable. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess that and I also was trained on working with interpreters while I was with Justice. And I did not understand one of the first things I did. It was me, the interpreter, and the person for whom the interpreter was working. So I looked at the interpreter during the conversation, and I was told that, well, no, that the interpreter is working with this individual. You should look at that person. It
Mm-hmm.
was very counterintuitive for me because, well, but you're the one speaking to me.
Mm-hmm.
She's speaking to you and you're speaking to me. So I'm looking at you. And if you're saying that that's not appropriate. I get that. But you have to forgive me if it takes me a while to get used to it because it just is a courtesy, it seems, that I should be looking at you. That was also a real awakening. I had never worked with interpreters before. That was, I learned a lot from that, just that particular situation about the dynamics of the interpreter encounter, if you will. That was very beneficial. And I think about that every so often.
Looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities in the field of federal compliance and disability rights?
I think it often that comes when there are new laws like the new healthcare civil rights laws.
Mm-hmm.
And there are new laws that people don't really know about or fully understand. That's an opportunity for additional education to explain not only what the new laws are all about, but
Mm-hmm.
where they're coming from, why there is a concern about the accuracy of translations, for example, or working with to ensure that people with disabilities don't have impediments in their route of travel that affects their ability to access healthcare services. So with the new healthcare regulations that came out in May, that's a
Mm-hmm.
great opportunity to educate and really inform people on what not just what the requirements are, but why do we have them? It's to increase that access that we've been talking about.
Right. So you teach implicit bias in healthcare at Georgetown University School of Medicine and the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. What are the key takeaways you hope your students gain from this course?
I think that there are several things, but the main part is, which is kind of not something that is generally known, that every human being has bias. It's
Mm-hmm.
a part of our brain chemistry. So it's not being judgmental. It's not saying things are good or bad. It's the reality of being a human being. We all have them. So when I talk to my students about that, that really gives them a whole different approach that, and they start thinking about how what their thought processes are and where their reactions come from. And that's, again, that goes to the education piece broadly. That if you think about, well, why am I reacting that way? Well, why do I react that way with two different people who look differently, who have different colored skin, for example, than I do? Speak with an accent. One's a man or one's a woman, that why you react that way. So that's one of the things we talk about in our first class of the semester, and that's a theme that carries forward in having my students work through, well, what do you do in these situations? What do you do because you will encounter this? How would you handle it? Then I'm a big believer in that too, giving people the tools to empower them to make decisions and understand not only where their decisions come from, but what the overarching, legal principles are that govern how they act and how their actions are perceived.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about people who are like kind of like concerned about their accent and are too afraid to talk because they don't want to be perceived a certain way?
Well, and I can certainly understand that. There are all kinds of perceptions and reactions that flow from them. But as you know, I'm also a big believer in self-advocacy. And
Mm-hmm.
there are times that you're in a certain situation and you're trying to achieve something or get some type of service, and you're not getting it because whether you're ignored or people don't take you seriously. And I think that one of the realities, which is could be challenging for people who are new to this country,
Mm-hmm.
we have our own advocacy traditions here, and we have our own legal authorities, which for the most part are different than in many other countries. So understanding that part of the American way, if you will, is advocating for yourself so that you are able to achieve what all these laws that we talk about all the time, what they're all about, but also to be in a situation where later on you could say, hey, I tried to do X, Y, and Z, and
Mm-hmm.
nothing was really happening until I said, I need this service, or I'd like your help. And that kind of changed things. So I understand it. I understand it from my own family experience and professional experience. I think that that's something that I wish more people were involved with, either training or education that really gets to the core of self-advocacy, and to the point, with the point being to take actions that you feel are important for you and that are beneficial to you, your family, or your career. So while I understand that, and I certainly understand what the reaction can be, I think also there sometimes that one of my favorite expressions is excuse me. It's like, hi, I'm here and I'd like your attention, please, because I'd like, whatever it is that I would like. I think excuse me and no are three of my favorite words.
No. I used to be criticized for saying no too much. I like the
Oh,
word
oh no,
no.
no, no. I get that. I think there's also a gender distinction, but I think, oh boy. And I tell my students that too, that if someone's doing something and you see it, it's discriminatory.
Hmm.
Use the three words. Excuse me, don't do that. That's wrong.
Hmm.
No. So, yeah, I get where you're coming from. I've heard that many times. But as I'm sure you can realize, I use no a lot in situations that are appropriate.
Of
And
course.
I learned a long time ago that if I don't do that, no one's going to do it for me.
Exactly. Like sometimes we have like my mom is a huge people pleaser, so that's how I was raised too, people please as well. And then I kind of taught myself to say no more, and then you self-advocate, like you mentioned. And you have this experience learning on your parents' example, how they were, constantly, overlooked all their lives. And you're like, no is a very good phrase, actually.
Yeah, it is. It's incredible how powerful that can be when it's
Mhm.
deployed appropriately. Oh, yeah, it's one of the
Yeah.
most powerful words in the language.
Hmm. Are there any like self-advocacy trainings that you could recommend to people who are like, they come to this country, they're new, and America is big on this, but a lot of countries are not. There, people are used to, be quiet and just deal with their rights overlooked, discriminated against.
I can't say that I'm aware of overall the availability of what I would recommend for self advocacy. And I'm not going to self promote, but I mean, that's what I do. And
Hmm.
my students know that. I tell them right off the bat, we're going to talk about how you not only advocate for yourselves, you advocate for your patients, you advocate for your clients, you advocate for the legal system, you advocate for the healthcare system, because that's the only way that you can improve things the way you say you want to. Because I hear all the time, I work with a lot of doctors about advocacy, advocate for the patient. And I ask them, well, how do you do that? Many of them say, oh, we write an article that talks about that. Well, you sounds like what you're doing is you're advocating within this closed circle to
Hmm.
people who agree with you. That's not advocacy. If advocacy is designed to change something, you have to go beyond your comfort zone and advocate to people who may not agree with you. And what if the tasks is to get them to listen and then achieve whatever it is you want to achieve? But it is interesting how so many of the doctors that I work with are, so we'll write an article or we'll go talk at a conference. Okay, I mean, that's part of it, but it can't be the be all and end all, because at the end of the day, that's not going to change what you want.
Hmm. Did you feel, growing up, did you feel a large gap between you and yourself and your family since they were immigrants and you're such a typical American to me, you're like, I don't know, that's how I see Americans when I didn't even realize that your family is immigrant family. So did you feel that any like difference?
Well, that's a really interesting point. Excuse me. And I think that in growing up, it became obvious, and I learned more about this as I got older, that my parents grew up low income And there were a lot of things they didn't have, a lot of things they wish they had the opportunity to have or to do. Well, they funneled their expectations in that sense through me. And one of the things that they wanted to do when they were growing up is learn how to play a classical musical instrument. So I had to learn how to play a classical musical instrument, but I didn't want to learn how to play a classical musical instrument. So eventually they kind of got the idea that this wasn't working out and they moved beyond that. But they still, whether it came from choice of college, choice of career, that these were things that well, we didn't have this, Bruce, and we want you to have it. And while, I appreciate having an opportunity, excuse me, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to go there. I don't want to study this. I want to do this. And I think it took them a while to get to that point. But we, not surprisingly, as you can imagine, we had our strong disagreements. And perhaps that's where I learned to be a successful self-advocate.
Were you difficult as a teenager?
I would say that I was difficult as far as pushing back with my parents, that if my parents said, like with the classical music, learn this. Well, I don't want to learn it. Well, we want you to learn it. You can't come out of your room until you practice. So in that sense, I would say I was challenging, not only to them, but I challenged them in ways that weren't inappropriate, but that I would say, no, that's not what I want to do. I understand you didn't have this choice growing up. I'm sorry about that, but I'm not you. I'm not interested in doing that. So I think my parents would have agreed that I was challenging with them. And they had their own epiphany up at some point where they realized they're no longer living, but if they were, they would say, yeah, he was right. And we shouldn't have pushed that much. I know my dad said that before, at the end of his life. So I appreciated that. I understood where they were coming from. I understood that more. But I think, frankly, that gives me more of a feel for working with people who were new to this country. I understand that. And I understand differences among countries and the American tradition. And I very much appreciate your calling me the typical American that you could, I'm like the embodiment of that I've been told that when I've been to other countries too. So I think that that's important to have an understanding of where people are coming from and relate to them on their terms rather than terms that I dictate.
So yeah, this is exactly how, typical America is the country that welcomes. That's how I see it. That's what I love about it, the country of all different cultures. And you teach about it. You teach about welcoming, how important it is, acceptance and all this inclusion. So this is how I see the whole country as a new immigrant myself. So
And I agree. I think that's we are the only country in the world to have as many people who come from different countries than anyone else. It's not even close with the number of countries where Americans have come from. No country can match that. So I agree with you. This is the welcoming country. This is a country built by, sustained by immigrants. That's always been one of our biggest strengths.
exactly. So let's talk about Leo a little bit. Having participated in numerous remote and on-site conferences, what are your thoughts about Leo's conferences?
Well, I love them. And it's especially with 2 times a year, we have very engaging conversations. I love the conversations that Ginny and I have, and being able to interact with people who are in the language services profession, I think is very satisfying for me. And I also take it very seriously as an attorney to be able to provide information to people pro bono and just talking about issues that as you know, that we have discussed. So I remember when we first talked about having this conference years ago, and I have been a big proponent of doing this for a long, long time. And you guys are the best. I mean, it's like, sure, I have a conference, but and everything works out like fantastically because you guys know what you're doing and you do it very well.
Thank you so much. We are as passionate as you are about this job. So at Leo 9 in June, you'll be presenting a session titled AI and Algorithms. What's in your present and future? What key topics do you plan to cover, and why are they important for today's language access professionals?
Well, I did a presentation the other day for the National Association, National Center for State Courts about AI and language. And I think that there's a natural human tendency to be attracted to the new hot thing, whatever that is. And in this context, that's clearly AI, which is great. AI does a lot of great things. It has a lot of potential. However, it's not something that we can use for all things at all times and then just like walk out of the room and let it run itself. It doesn't work like that. So talking about what issues have come up, how to deal with them, looking forward to into the future, knowing that AI isn't leaving us, it will just grow in use and potential. But it's not perfect and it's not completely reliable. There have been many situations that reveal that. I think AI right now can be useful in so many ways, whether it's from an administrative standpoint, a calendaring standpoint, with uh, artistic depictions. I think it already can do amazing things. But it's not a human being and it doesn't have a human brain. And we still have a ways to go to get to the point where, from a legal perspective, I'd be comfortable with saying, yeah, let's leave the room and the AI is good. It can work on its own. Not there yet, but we may be sometime in the future, but not next week, next month, or next year.
That's true. Are there any upcoming projects or collaborations with Leo that you are particularly excited about?
Well, I'm excited about the conference. I mean, every year I circle June and December. I don't circle the dates because the dates haven't come out when I'm doing that. But I always point to those months because I enjoy the conference so much. But also too, just like what we did the other recently, Ginny and I did a
Mm-hmm.
webinar about the new healthcare civil rights rules. And I think being able to do more of that and give people accurate information that is informed by a lot of experience so that
Yeah.
they know not only what rules they may have to follow depending on where they're working, but circling back to what you said before,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can say, well, excuse me, I want an interpreter. Or, excuse me, I don't understand this translation because it's inaccurate. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd like another one. Self advocacy is a big part of it too. So, I'm excited about that every year. I am too. And the more opportunities to do, whether it's something like this, podcast, webinar, I'm all for that.
Thank you so much for sharing the knowledge. This is very generous what you do. And that webinar was a huge success, I've heard. So thank you for this, Bruce. Um, so let's talk a little bit about your other side, the person, Bruce, not just the high top level professional. What activities or hobbies do you enjoy in your free time?
Well, I mean, we live in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C. There are a lot of outdoor opportunities, national parks, state parks, all kinds of things that really focus the mind and allow you to enjoy nature. But I like history a lot. So I like to go to battlefields, Civil War battlefields. There are a lot of Civil War battlefields in the area and kind of let my mind wander and wonder, well, Why did they do this? What if they had done that? I enjoy that a lot. Reading, I'm a rock and roll guy, so that's like a constant thing. Um, Spending time with my family is a big priority. My son is home from law school, so we are looking forward to a particularly wonderful summer because he's here. And I think and I also like driving. So I love driving. In fact, it reminds me in a way, of growing up in New York. It's just rolling down the window and cranking up the music and putting my arm on the door and singing along, and then have everybody look at me while I'm driving by them, wondering where this guy is coming from. So yeah, I'm blessed that I have a lot of things that I like to do and have the opportunities to do them, and I take full advantage of it.
Speaking of books, do you have any favorite books or movies that have influenced you either personally or professionally? I'm super
Well,
curious about that.
there's one main book. My mother was a novelist, and she published her book in 1980, a historical novel about ancient Egypt that was very admiring of what she did to write it, what she did to learn about it, and the whole writing process. So I think that really influenced me because, as you know, I eventually wrote and had published my own book. And I know that she inspired me. There's really no question about that. I remember her writing her book very well. This was before computers, so she would write longhand on a legal pad. I mean, we can imagine what that's like. And I mean, I did a little bit of that when I started out too. So that I would say that is unquestionably the biggest influence for me, both personally and professionally.
Can you share a memorable experience or a favorite place you visited that had a significant impact on you? What made it special?
Well, there are a lot, but I'll just, you're forcing me to pick one, Elena, so I'll do that.
Well, you
I,
can do more. You can do three, up to three.
well, then if I could do more, I'll just pick one more. But the first one is seeing the Great Pyramids in Egypt and the pyramids at Saqqara in Egypt, walking in them, around them, and just seeing these buildings that were 5,000 years old and wondering about how they were built, why they were built, the culture at the time. That drove me to have excuse me, an interest in Egyptian history. I took Egyptian history when I was in college. I also took Arabic when I was in college. So those were immensely influential and had a big impact on me. I would also say, just as there's another, is seeing the Grand Canyon in Arizona for the first time. That I don't typically like go, whoa, that's like an amazing thing to see. But with the pyramids and with the Grand Canyon, I know I did that. I remember seeing the Grand Canyon and saying, wow, this is so much more than I even imagined. So, and then really wondering about the whole beauty of nature and how these natural wonders formed, but then just frankly, just taking the time to enjoy them. I would say those are probably right at the top of the list.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Bruce, for your time.
Oh, of course.
And we look
So,
forward to learning more from you at the conference.
hey, you just have to ask me because it's always a pleasure to see you and talk with you. So I very much look forward to continuing to doing that.